Many of you in the room have been involved over the last few years with various research and demonstration projects, including some here in Kentucky. So we're delighted to have Scott come on now and talk about some of the clover tolerance and forage response. Scott?
Thanks, Gary. First of all, I want to give my appreciation to Pat Burch. A lot of you all don't realize this, but we would not be where we're at today if Pat Burch had not stuck it out and had warned the folks in Indianapolis out that we needed this product. He is the whole reason why it's here. Now, I would appreciate if you all give him a big round of applause. So I'm going to talk a little bit about white clover tolerance and forage response. And I'm just going to point out, Byron Sleugh is giving a poster. We do also have a clover tolerance poster that Byron's going to be presenting that talks about varieties. And you're going to see that there are differences in tolerance among white clover varieties, which we're really excited about. So make sure you take a chance to go look at that. So just to reiterate what Pat is talking about, GF-3731 is a new herbicide that's powered by a brand new active, and we're really excited about it. And for the past 5 years, we have really been pushing hard to do all the research on this to bring it here to get to this day. I want to talk about evaluating clover injury. Now, this herbicide is not something you go out there and spray and your clover just stands there and takes it, okay? We are talking about a broadleaf herbicide. Clovers are broadleaves, and so you do see some activity on those clovers. But the thing is, these clovers tend to recover very quickly, and it's not something that is sustained over a long period of time. And we've done trials in a variety of settings. One, we've done trials in pure stands of clover nursery. I have a really nice clover nursery in Peculiar, Missouri. I don't know if you ever heard of Peculiar, Missouri, but they got a big sign out front that says where the odds are with you. That's not, I'm not joking, that's what it actually says. And then we have a lot of in pasture. We've probably done over 30 trials in pasture with this, evaluating clover tolerance. And so we've seen it under grazing pressure, we've seen it without grazing pressure. And we've looked at several different formulations of this, and also different rates, but I'm going to be talking about using it at 24 and 36 ounces. I'm sorry, it's 24, 36, and I think 48 ounces. I have a little mistake there. And we looked at clover damage weekly. So we looked at lodging, and you'll see that lodging is probably the most prominent of all the damage to the clover. Chlorosis, necrosis, and actually cover. And we also have some time-lapse photography, which I'll show you here in a second. I feel like I'm ignoring this side of the room. So first of all, let's talk about lodging. When you spray this initially, clover will lay down, okay? So we're talking about lodging. This is, I think this is about a week after. You can see the white clover blooming, but you can see all the rest of the clover has lodged, all right? Normally that would scare us, but the thing is this lodging doesn't last as long. When we look at lodging as a percent of the total population out there, how many of those plants have lodged over there, or what percent of the area? So looking at lodging and looking at weeks after application, we see here 1 week, 3 weeks, it's kind of level. Then after about 3 weeks, it starts to decrease, and all of a sudden that clover starts to stand back up again. And by the time we get out here to anywhere from 4+ weeks after, we're usually at a fairly acceptable level of control in terms of lodging. Now, chlorosis and necrosis are a little different. When I go out and I evaluate these stands, what I'm looking at is the percent of the area out there that I see that's in clover. What percentage of that area is showing signs of chlorotic tissue, which you can see here, and you can see some necrosis here as well. What I worry about when I first started doing this, how much of that chlorotic tissue is going to convert over to necrotic tissue after a period of time, and what we found was it really didn't. It started to recover. So looking at chlorosis and necrosis, in these plots. So this is across 27 trials across the U.S. You can see the chlorosis here ranges from 0 to 30% here on the y-axis, so not a great deal here to begin with. But 1 to 2 weeks after, we see about 20 to 25% of the clover is showing signs of chlorotic tissue. And look at these three rates. So I've got 24, 32, and 48 ounces here. It's fairly consistent no matter how high we take that herbicide. in that setting. They tend to get about 20-25% chlorotic tissue, and then they start to go down until we get down here to about 5 to 7 weeks. Then it starts to get down below an acceptable level. Now, when we do evaluations, one thing that we have agreed on time and time again is that 10% is usually where we say that that's acceptable. Okay, you got about 10% chlorotic tissue, it's acceptable. When you have a little more than that, people usually stop the vehicle and get out and want to kick around. At 10% or less, you usually don't stop the vehicle. You just say, well, you know, that field looks a little funny, but I think it's fine. So that's how we kind of judge. It's the reason why I have these lines in some of these slides. So here we're looking at necrotic tissue. And you do get a little bit of necrosis. Early on, it may increase over time, but it doesn't get too severe. Necrosis is usually a very minor component of this damage profile in the clover. So less than 10% of that leaf area showing necrotic tissue, and as we progress, that necrotic tissue goes away. So not a great deal of issue with necrosis. And then we have cover. Cover is something that's really hard to evaluate across all the sites. So what I did is that I wanted to evaluate clover cover in pure stands. I didn't want to have any competition with grasses, and so what I did is I went out and I went into my clover nursery, and I went out in I think it was late March, and I sprayed a product called, it was a turf product. You can't use this, so don't even ask me if you can. But this is a clover nursery, and I went in and I sprayed this product called Dimension that would keep any grasses or other broadleaves from coming up into this particular stand. And so I evaluated pure stands of clover. So we started out right at near 100% clover cover. And we started out at right around 100%, and look at the axis here. I've got, it's 50 to 100. There comes a slight dip, and most of that is as it lodges, and some of that soil becomes visible. But after we get about 4 to 5 weeks after, that clover is starting to get back to that population before. So there's a slight dip, and that's more due to the plants lodging. It's not that plants are actually dying out. I will say in a setting where I was using, where I had these trials placed, the clover was thick, and it was so thick that when it lodged, it would it seemed like it's smothering itself out. And so it tended to bounce back a little slower than what we had seen in our grazing trials. And Pat had seen that as well. He would say, clover for me recovers in about 2 to 3 weeks. And I said, well, yeah, my nursery, though, they recover around 4 weeks. And a lot of that comes down to that clover kind of laying over on itself and not being grazed off. So this is, I did this I don't know if I did this 2 summers ago, but this, after I did this, Pat and I sent it out, and I think it made the rounds around the world within Dow. But I took a trail camera and set it on a time lapse, and I had it every 6 hours or something like that. And I'm just going to show you a snippet of clover recovery over time. So this is day 1. This is the day I made the application. Can't tell where I sprayed, obviously, because this is the same day I made the application. This is 7 days after. This is where we really start to see that lodging take place. This is day 14. You can see you have some necrotic tissue out there, some chlorotic tissue. Here we are at day 21. Now we start to tick back up. So day 21, day 28. So now we're 4 weeks out. Day 32, day 46. So by about 3 to 4 weeks, that clover is coming much stronger than it was, the week after it's starting to come out of the hole. And you can see that we recovered with nearly a full stand, just like we had started with. So let's talk about pasture response to this new herbicide. Pat and I took on the daunting task this year of going out and harvesting plot sites, doing botanical separations, weighing it, and I think there's a few students in Missouri and Virginia that curse every time they hear our name now. But this is what it took. We had 3 sites across the U.S., 2 in Missouri, 1 in Virginia. I set them up as a split plot design where that subplot was actually a sampling date. So I had a particular area that I was going to sample on a given date. We had took three 5.4 square foot quadrats. We clipped them to 2 inches of height. So what you're seeing is yield above 2 inches. And we separated those species and dried them to determine the herbage mass of each component. And then we sampled pre and post grazing throughout the season to kind of see how things changed. And our treatments that I'm going to be talking about today are graze on next at 24 ounces, which would be the standard rate, a standard rate of our new herbicide at 24 ounces, and then looked at mowing. I think when we collected this data, I think one thing that jumped out and popped us all right in the mouth was that mowing sucks. I still can't wrap my head. When you see this data, you're like, why in the world we let farmers mow? But this is the trial that we set up. Here are our treatments. You can see the mowing treatments. This was the day I mowed. And you can see I've put an example of here of how I set this up as a split plot where I would go in and there would be certain blocks in there that I would sample on a date. Here's about 40 days after application. This is our new herbicide next to an area we have no treatment. This is cockleburr, fleabane, horse nettle, and tall ironweed. I think there are a few other just minor species in there. But here we have 30 days after application. Here's that white clover blooming. All right, this is a rotational grazing system where these animals were turned back in there, so they were able to remove that herbage that had been damaged, and it looks like we got a lot better recovery. Here's your tall ironweed, here's your cockleburr, your fleabane, and you can see the difference in the level of weed control. So looking at these pastures, I've got pounds of dry matter over here, and I've got the particular treatment that we had in these trials, and this is in Marthasville, Missouri, and this is July 5th. This is 41 days after the initial treatment. This is the total weed biomass in that field. So this is the new concept, the new herbicide. This is graze on next. This is mowing, and this is no treatment whatsoever. Look at the level of weed control we have 41 days after. This is something, a little gem that I picked up this year. We need to do more testing on this, but you're going to see that annual Lespedeza actually performed really well in this. I suspect, I don't know yet, we need more data, but I suspect annual Lespedeza may be just as tolerant as white clover from the data that I've seen. And here's the red clover component. You can see the amount of white clover, 109 pounds per acre of white clover collected. Here's what we had in mowing, 59 pounds. And then no treatment whatsoever, 141 pounds of actual clover out there. And then you see forage grasses, 645. Graze on next, we got a little over 1,000 pounds. Mowing, we got 151 because we cut it all off. And then no treatment whatsoever. But what the take-home message here are these values here, these bottom two columns, maintaining that much clover in these stands and actually being able to control that large portion of weeds. This is in Rockville, Missouri. This is 88 days after treatment. The reason why I'm showing you 88 days instead of like I had 41 with the previous one is because it took us that long to get control of western ironweed. Western ironweed is a little more hardy. It's a little harder to kill than tall ironweed. So the data I want to show you is after we got that western ironweed under control. So this is 88 days after application. You can see the white clover component's a little smaller than here. There was a lot of variability across these trials, so sometimes it's hard to get a good value, but look at it compared to just mowing it all off. And then the no treatment. We had 72 pounds of clover. As far as total forage biomass goes, we can see that our new product is up here where the no treatment is at in terms of just forage biomass at 88 days after. You can see graze on next here at almost 1,300 pounds an acre. And then you see the mowing. This has been recovered now for roughly a month. But the real story here happens not so much in the season. We know we protect our clovers in the season of application. But Pat started collecting data a year after, and this really told a story. So this is our concept, this 3731 at 24 ounces of an acre. You can see that we've got 47 pounds of total weed biomass out there, 101 pounds of white clover, 491 pounds of forage grass. We compare that to where we mowed, and you can see we've got about 1,500 pounds of weed pressure out there, 88 pounds of white clover, and 178 pounds of grass. And then you can see here where we mowed late. And then you see graze on next here. Do you all know why this line is so green for and why we have so much green grass? It goes back to what Dennis was talking. We killed those clovers out and it turned all that nitrogen over, and we got this forage response. But this is significant. To have one application and come back a year later to have as much or more clover than we do in the plots that we'd mowed the year before, that tells a big story about this new product. That we can go out and manage our weed pressure, and we can maintain those clovers, and possibly through removing those weeds, actually create room for more desirable forages. So just a quick summary. 3731 has a minimal effect on white clover population and just leaf injury. Most obvious response is 2 to 3 weeks of lodging, and most of that injury subsides within 3 to 4 weeks under grazing pressure. It might subside a little faster. We have a positive forage response where we're maintaining white clover populations with this application of GF-3731. And it's obvious that it's a much better option than going out there and mowing. We've always said that our biggest competitor was a mower when it came to weed control. And it is obvious that this is much better for maintaining clover and controlling weeds. In our trials, we saw over 100% increase in forage compared to mowing if we looked at it a year after. Now granted, that's going to depend on how much weed pressure we have in the field. And we saw 80% better control, or 80% control of weed pressure in these plots. Unlike mowing, I think the clear advantage here is we're not removing grazable forage with this product, and we're maintaining those clovers. So I say put up those mowers and let's start doing something about the weed pressure other than cutting them 2 or 3 times a year. So with that, I kind of sped through that. We're running a little late on time, but
Scott, a big round of applause while we do a few things here.